The best gift would be the day you're gone, my daughter said across the Thanksgiving table. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, like she'd waited years to say it. The room fell silent. The candles flickered. And in that moment, I realized love can rot quietly until it finally speaks. Thanksgiving night should have smelled like peace, roasted turkey, cranberry sauce, laughter. But in my house, the air was thick with unspoken truths. My daughter Fern sat across from me, her husband scrolling through his phone. The television in the living room played a football game on mute, as if even it didn't dare interrupt what was about to happen. I poured her a glass of wine, trying to bridge the quiet. "You've always liked the red from Sonoma," I said softly. She didn't look up. Her eyes stayed on the plate. Then, without warning, she said it as calmly as one might comment on the weather. "The best gift would be the day you're gone." The knife in my hand paused mid-air. For a moment, I thought I had misheard, but no one corrected her. Her husband's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. My heart didn't race. It just sank like a stone thrown into dark water. "Fern," I managed, "what did you just say?" She looked up, then finally meeting my eyes. "You heard me, Dad. You've done enough. We need space. A life that's not built around your memories or your debts." There was no anger in her tone, only a kind of practiced detachment. That made it worse. My hands trembled slightly as I set the knife down. I looked around the room, the photographs on the walls, the wooden clock Maria bought before she passed the crystal vase on the table, filled with white lilies. Everything in this house had a story. Everything except her eyes now. I wanted to defend myself, to say that every bill I paid, every hour I worked, every corner of this house had been for her, but my voice didn't come, only silence. Dinner ended without a word. Her husband cleared his throat, once said something about traffic, and they left. The sound of their car fading down the driveway was the only goodbye. When the house was empty again, I sat in her chair. The plate was still warm. I looked at the untouched turkey, at the empty chair where Maria used to sit, and thought maybe Fern was right. Maybe the best gift I could give was absence. I didn't cry that night, not because I wasn't broken, but because something deeper took its place. A cold, precise awareness, like a door opening in a dark hallway. Outside snow had started falling slow, deliberate flakes landing on the steps like they had nowhere else to go. I opened the window and let the cold air in. It smelled of pine and endings. For 15 years, I'd built my life around making amends for the years I'd failed Maria, for the mistakes that cost us peace. I'd given Fern the house paid off her student loans and carried her debts like penance. But maybe all I'd done was teach her how to need not how to stand. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, a man of 65 silver hair eyes that had seen too much and said too little. I ran a hand over my beard and whispered, "If disappearance is what she wants, maybe it's time she learns what it truly means." The morning light came in pale and unforgiving, cutting through the blinds like truth itself. The house still smelled of last night's turkey cold, greasy, clinging to the air like regret. I found myself standing in the kitchen barefoot, on the tiles Maria had chosen 15 years ago. A pot of coffee sat on the counter, half full. Not mine. Not. I wasn't alone. Fern was there, hair tied back, wearing the same sweater from last night. She was cleaning up what was left of the dinner table, stacking plates with a rhythm too calm for someone who'd said what she said. I leaned against the doorframe. "You came back." She didn't turn around. "I forgot my purse." Her tone was clipped, practical. But there was something else there, a shadow under the words. "You said some things last night," I began. "Maybe you didn't mean them." Finally, she turned, arms crossed, lips tight. "Dad, don't make this harder than it is. You know what I meant." I watched her eyes, not angry, not cruel, just distant, like she'd drawn on in her mind and decided I was on the wrong side. "I've given you everything," I said quietly. "The house, the car, your education." I thought. "That's the point," she interrupted, almost whispering. "Everything I have feels like yours. Every decision I make feels like you're still watching. I need to live without that." There it was, the truth. Not hatred, not greed, just the cold hunger for independence that comes too late in life, when gratitude starts to feel like debt. I nodded slowly. "And if I walk away, that makes you free." She looked at me for a moment, really looked, then said softly, "Maybe it makes us both free." The words hit harder than last night's. For a moment, I thought about the years after Maria died, how Fern was my anchor, my reason to keep breathing. Every grocery run, every letter I mailed her, every check I wrote, all of it, had been a way to stay connected. But now, connection had turned to chains. She turned back to the sink. Water ran. The sound filled the space where love used to be. "I don't want to fight," she said. You're still my father. But maybe it's time you let me live my life." I wanted to tell her that I wasn't stopping her, that I was only trying to keep her safe, to give her what Maria would have wanted her to have. But the truth standing there under that harsh morning light was that I didn't know who I was without her needing me. I stepped closer, stopping just short of her shoulder. "Do you remember what your mother used to say?" Fern hesitated, then shook her head. "She said the world doesn't change when you leave it. It only notices the space you once filled." For a second, her hands froze on the dishes. Then she whispered, "Maybe that's what I'm afraid of, that I'll never fill it right." Something cracked in her voice, but she didn't turn. I could have held her, could have said it was okay. But my arms felt heavy and my heart heavier still. Some lessons aren't meant to be taught by comfort. Instead, I just said, "I'll take care of things, Fern. You won't have to worry anymore." She frowned slightly, sensing something behind the words. Oh, what does that mean? I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides the goodbye inside it. You'll understand soon. I took my coat from the hanger by the door, feeling the weight of my keys in my hand. Outside, snow kept falling soft and endless. Fern followed me to the porch, Dad, she said quietly. I didn't mean it like... I stopped her with a gentle look. Yes, you did. And it's all right, maybe it's time I finally listen. Her eyes glistened. Not tears, just the shimmer of something she couldn't name. I stepped down the stairs, the snow crunching under my boots. The air was clean cold, almost holy. Behind me, she stood in the doorway, arms folded, unsure whether to go after me or let me vanish into the morning. For years, I'd thought love was about staying, that leaving meant failure. But as I walked toward the gate, I realized sometimes staying too long becomes its own kind of cruelty. The gate creaked open. The wind carried her voice faintly. Dad, will you call me? I didn't answer, because some silences are promises and some are farewells. The house had never sounded this quiet. Not the kind of quiet that soothes you, the kind that listens back. I walked through the living room, slowly, the floorboards creaking like old bones. Everywhere I looked, there were pieces of a life built around others, framed certificates from Fern's school years. Maria's books stacked neatly in the corner, the old coat she'd refused to throw away. The morning light drifted through the curtains, soft and gold, falling on the piano. No one played anymore. I ran a finger along the keys. They responded with a faint, broken note. It had been 15 years since Maria passed. 15 years of paying bills, maintaining the garden, and waiting for phone calls that got shorter every year. 15 years of believing that if I just kept giving, maybe I'd feel less alone. I sat at her desk, the one by the window, facing the oak tree. The surface was clean, untouched. Only one thing remained, a photograph of her holding Fern as a child, both smiling under a summer sun that felt eternal. I traced the edge of the frame with my thumb. You'd know what to do, I whispered. And then, as if memory were a voice carried by wind, I heard her. Not literally, but close enough that my chest tightened. John, you fix everything but yourself. It was something she used to say whenever I stayed up too late tinkering with broken things that didn't ask to be fixed. The faucet, the old radio, our marriage. I laughed under my breath. Still, right, Maria. The drawer beneath the desk slid open easily. Inside, old papers, mortgage statements, insurance letters, payment receipts, all with my name printed in faded ink. Then, tucked between two envelopes, a document I hadn't looked at in years, property transfer agreement. I unfolded it slowly. My signature, Fern's. It was the day I'd given her this house. The same house her mother and I had built with our hands, one paycheck at a time. I remembered that afternoon. Fern crying, saying she couldn't afford rent after her divorce. You can have the house, I'd told her. It's just walls. You're what matters. Now, standing here years later, those words felt naive, or maybe they were just love, wearing the wrong name. I stared out the window. Snow was falling harder now, gathering on the porch. The oak tree stood still, bare branches against a white sky. I used to think that tree was immortal. Maria used to joke that it was my twin, stubborn and slow to change. On the desk lay a stack of unopened letters. The top one was from the bank. I hesitated, then tore it open. Mortgage cleared. Account settled. Balance due zero. I blinked. I'd paid it off months ago automatically out of habit. She probably didn't even notice. A hollow laugh escaped me. Even now, I'm still cleaning up after her. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the old wood press against my back. The house groaned under the winter wind, like it was tired, too. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask a question that had been waiting for years. What if Maria was never the one I was trying to make peace with? Maybe I'd been trying to atone to Fern. Maybe every check, every sacrifice, every quiet dinner had been my way of saying sorry for the things I couldn't undo when Maria died, for leaving her alone in grief while I drowned in work. But somewhere along the way, sorry turned into servitude. I opened another drawer and found Maria's old journal. The handwriting was still elegant, looping precise. I flipped through until I found a page that stopped me. If love becomes repayment, it stops being love. I read it twice, 3 times, then closed the book gently. That sentence didn't sound like something meant for Fern. It sounded like something meant for me. Outside, a car passed by, just a faint hum fading down the street. The house felt heavier with each breath. I looked again at the property transfer agreement, then at the photograph of Maria and Fern. One gave everything. The other learned to take. And maybe both of them were my fault. I stood up, went to the mirror, hanging beside the door. The reflection stared back, older-lined, but calm. For years, I thought strength meant enduring. Maybe it meant ending. I took the document, folded it neatly, and slipped it into a brown envelope. On the front, I wrote in slow, deliberate letters, "For Fern." Then I set it under the crystal vase, the one Maria loved, the one that caught the morning light just right. The snow outside kept falling, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. The kind that doesn't heal you, but clears the room for truth. The snow outside hadn't stopped. By noon, the whole street was wrapped in silence, buried under white. Inside, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, opened the blinds, and laid the stack of documents across the table like a confession. For the first time in years, I looked at them not as a father, but as a man counting the cost of devotion. Bills, statements, signatures, my handwriting everywhere like echoes of a life I'd signed away piece by piece. I pulled the property file closer. My eyes caught a line I hadn't noticed before primary owner John Miller. I frowned. That couldn't be right. I remembered signing over the deed to Fern years ago. I read the line again, slower this time, then turned the page. There was no signature from the county recorder. No finalized stamp. It wasn't transferred, not legally. For a long moment, I just sat there, letting the realization settle like dust. This house was still mine. The air in the room changed. Not lighter, not darker, just clearer. It felt like waking from a long, kind dream and realizing you've been robbed while asleep. I reached for my phone. The screen lit up with old contacts, most names forgotten. But one still mattered. Mark Rivera, attorney friend and one of the few people who still answered my calls. It rang twice. John, a deep voice said, steady and warm. Been a while. Too long, I replied. Mark, I need to ask you something about a property transfer. 221 Maple Drive. There was a pause, then papers rustling on his end. That's your primary residence, right? It was. I thought I transferred it to Fern 5 years ago. He made a low sound, part disbelief, part concern. I remember that draft, but it never closed. You wanted to finalize after the appraisal. Remember, it expired. The deed's still under your name. My hand tightened on the phone. So legally, it's mine. Yes, you're the sole owner. Always have been. Silence stretched between us. Outside, a bird landed on the frozen railing, looked in, then flew off again. I exhaled slowly. Thanks, Mark. John, everything okay? I think I said quietly. For the first time in a long time it will be. When the call ended, I set the phone down and looked around the room again, but this time with new eyes. Every corner, every photo, every wall, all of it still mine. Not as possession. As proof, I wasn't the ghost haunting Fern's life. She'd been haunting mine. For 15 years, I'd let guilt run this house, like a tyrant telling me what I could keep, what I had to give. But the law didn't care about guilt. The law remembered my name. I gathered the papers, neatly slid them into a folder, and labeled it in simple letters, Truth. Then I opened Maria's old ledger, the one she used to track our savings. I hadn't touched it in years. Inside were neat columns, numbers, penciled in with care, her way of controlling chaos. Next to the last entry, she had written something I'd forgotten. Fairness starts with clarity. I smiled faintly. Even now you're teaching me. That night I poured myself a glass of whiskey. The good one I'd been saving for something that mattered. I sat by the window, the folder beside me. The city lights glowed faintly in the distance, blurred by snow. For years I'd been living in emotional debt, paying interest on guilt that no one asked for. But numbers don't lie, and neither did signatures. I wasn't angry at Fern. Not yet. Anger implies surprise. What I felt was older than that. The calm clarity of a man who finally sees where the leak has been. I picked up the phone again and typed a message. We need to talk about the house. I didn't send it. Some truths don't need conversation. Instead, I wrote something else on a slip of paper and tucked it under the folder. You said the best gift would be my disappearance. I'm giving it to you, but not the way you expect. I sat there until midnight watching the snow swallow the streetlights. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was correction, the restoration of balance that had been missing for too long. When I finally turned off the light, the house didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a decision. And decisions, I realized, were the only gifts that age well. The next morning, the snow had turned to slush gray heavy, reluctant to melt. I drove downtown slowly, passing the same coffee shops Maria used to love, the same corners where time seemed to pause but never heal. Mark Rivera's office sat on the second floor of an old brick building across from the courthouse. The sign outside hadn't changed in 20 Rivera and Associates legal counsel. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. The receptionist recognized me, smiled softly, and said, "Mr. Rivera's expecting you." When I stepped into his office, Mark was already standing by the window. He was a tall man, early 70s now, but still sharp silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of face that looked carved from patience. "John Miller," he said with a grin that almost reached his eyes. "You're one of the few people I'd still come to work for on a Saturday." I shook his hand. "You always said the law never sleeps." He chuckled. "Neither do old dads." We sat across from each other. His desk was clean, precise, like everything about him. Files stacked neatly. A single mug of black coffee steaming beside a bronze scale of justice. I slid the folder across the table, the one I had labeled Truth. "Take a look." He flipped through it carefully. Mortgage receipts, deed copies, transfer drafts. The more he read, the more his brow furrowed. After a few minutes, he looked up. "You were right, the deed was never executed. Fern's name isn't anywhere on the official record. I gave her this house after her divorce," I said. "Told her she deserved stability. I thought it was done." Mark leaned back, sighing. "You were trying to be kind. The law doesn't recognize kindness, just ink." I stared at him for a moment. "So all this time, I thought I was living in her home. Turns out she's been living in mine." He nodded, legally and morally. We sat in silence. The city hummed faintly beyond the glass tires on wet asphalt sirens somewhere far away. Finally, Mark said, "I've seen this before, John. Parents trying to love their children through ownership. You gave too much, and she stopped seeing it as a gift." I smiled faintly. "You sound like Maria." He looked at me carefully. "She was right about you. Always fixing what doesn't need fixing." I let the words sink in. Then quietly, "She said the best gift I could give was my disappearance." Mark didn't flinch. He just asked, "And what do you plan to give her now?" I thought for a long time before answering. Exactly what she asked for, but with a receipt. He chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "You always did prefer poetic justice." I leaned forward. "I'm not looking to hurt her, Mark. I just want her to understand value, not in money, but in presence, in effort." He nodded slowly. "Then you don't need revenge. You need closure." The clock ticked on the wall. I realized how rare it was to sit across from someone who didn't try to fix or pity you. Mark closed the folder and slid it back to me. "Keep this safe. And if you decide to make changes to the will, I'll draft it myself." "I already have," I said. "Everything's settled. The rest she'll find in the envelope." He raised an eyebrow. "Envelope, something I wrote last night. It's not about money. It's about truth." Mark smiled the kind of smile old men give when they recognize another man's quiet war. "Truth has a price, John." "You sure she can afford it?" "I'm not giving her a bill," I said softly. "I'm giving her a lesson." He studied me for a moment, then stood and poured 2 cups of coffee. "Two fathers," he said, handing me one. "We're either villains or ghosts. Rarely anything in between." I lifted my cup. "To ghosts who finally rest." We drank in silence. The coffee was bitter grounding. When I left his office, the snow had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, thin slices of sunlight cutting through like forgiveness. I walked past the courthouse, people hurrying in and out, each carrying their own battles. I thought about Maria again, about how she used to tell me that truth doesn't arrive in storms, it arrives in seasons. Quiet, deliberate, unstoppable. That afternoon, I stopped by the bank and cleared the last balance on Fern's account, the final payment she owed. It wasn't for her. It was for me. Then I withdrew the rest. Every last cent I'd been saving for emergencies. This was one. When I got home, I placed the bank statement beside the folder. I wasn't just preparing to leave. I was preparing to end the part of my life that mistook sacrifice for love. The silence in the house didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. I woke before sunrise. The house was still the air cold enough to see my breath. On mornings like this, Maria used to hum while making coffee, some quiet hymn she never finished. I could almost hear it now threading through the silence. On the kitchen table lay 3 things: a pen, a stack of bills, and the brown envelope I'd written her name on for Fern. I sat down and began sorting. Electric, water, property tax, insurance. Each line item felt like a scar from a different year. For 15 years, I had paid them without question, as if debt were my proof of love. But today, for the first time, I wanted to see the end of every balance. I opened my laptop and logged into the bank. The numbers glowed back at me, my savings, her mortgage, her credit line. I cleared them all, one click at a time. Each confirmation felt like cutting a rope that had been wrapped around my chest. When it was done, I leaned back, exhaled, and whispered, "There. You're free." It wasn't anger. It wasn't charity. It was closure wrapped in logic. The house groaned softly under the weight of wind. Outside, the trees bowed in the cold. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in Maria's old chair by the window. The city was waking, thin smoke rising from chimneys, a stray dog crossing the street. Everything moving except me. I opened a notebook. The pages were blank, waiting. I began to write. "Fern, you once told me the best gift would be if I disappeared. Maybe you were right. Maybe I've been here too long, turning love into obligation. I'm leaving you the house, officially, this time. But I'm also leaving you the truth. Everything you have was never owed. It was given." Your mother used to say that people learn from what they lose, not from what they keep. I think it's time we both learn something new. You'll find all the documents beneath the crystal vase. I know you never liked it, but she did. And maybe someday you'll understand why. Don't look for me. I'll be somewhere quiet, somewhere that doesn't echo with old conversations. Love doesn't vanish when people do. It just changes its shape. Dad. When I finished, my hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the weight of peace. I folded the letter and placed it inside the envelope, along with the property folder, the deed, and the bank statements. It was everything she'd ever needed to know, and everything I no longer needed to carry. The sun was rising now, painting the snow gold. Dust floated through the air, like time slowed down just for me. I walked in through each room, turning off the lights one by one. In the hallway, I stopped by Maria's photograph. She was smiling, hair loose, eyes caught, mid-laughter. You'd approve, wouldn't you? I whispered. For a second, the sunlight caught her frame perfectly, a soft shimmer, as if the house itself exhaled. I went to my bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept my passport and a single plane ticket. Hawaii. One way, booked months ago, a promise I once made to myself and never kept. Maria always wanted to go. Said she wanted to see the ocean without deadlines, without noise. Maybe I'd see it for her now. I packed light, just a suitcase, some clothes, her journal, and a single photo of the three of us before the world got complicated. Downstairs, I paused by the dining table one last time. The lilies in the crystal vase had wilted overnight, drooping toward the letter beneath them, like they too understood. Before stepping out, I reached for the light switch but stopped. The house didn't deserve darkness. Not today. I left the lights on. As I locked the door, I felt no sadness, only stillness, the kind that follows long storms. Outside, the snow had thinned. The driveway was clear enough for footprints. I stood there, staring at them, forming behind me, leading away from the house. 15 years of penance. 15 years of debt and devotion. All ending in a single morning that felt neither tragic nor triumphant, just necessary. I looked back once, and for the first time I didn't see a home. I saw release. The morning air was sharp, glass cold, the kind that made every breath visible. I'd loaded my single suitcase into the car, started the engine, and let it idle in the driveway. But I couldn't leave just yet, not before the final act. I went back inside. The warmth of the house met me like an old photograph, familiar but distant. The clock ticked. The air carried the faint scent of lilies fading, but not gone. The crystal vase stood at the center of the dining table, catching the light the way Maria used to catch laughter effortlessly. I placed the envelope beneath it, pressing it flat against the polished wood. It fit there perfectly, as if the house itself had been waiting for this moment of completion. My hand lingered over the vase. For a second, I thought I heard her voice again. Maria's soft hum, echoing through memory. If love is still holding you down, it's not love. It's gravity. I smiled faintly. You always had the better words. Then I whispered the rest of my own. Now it's my turn to let go. Voiceover begins John's letter intercut with his movements. Fern, when you were little, you used to stand on this very chair and tell me you wanted to touch the ceiling. I told you to jump, and every time you fell, you laughed because you knew I'd catch you. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe that's why you grew up thinking there'd always be hands waiting beneath you. I walked through the hall slowly, brushing my fingers along the walls, the pictures, the fragments of lives once intertwined. Each photo was a small mercy, a lie that once kept us warm. You were right about one thing: this house was never freedom. It was a museum of what I couldn't let die. I see that now. And I don't blame you for wanting to leave it behind. I stopped by Maria's room, still untouched, her perfume faint in the air, like a ghost too kind to haunt. But what I gave you, Fern, wasn't chains. It was the last translation of love I understood. I don't know how to love any other way except by building, fixing, providing. My steps echoed on the stairs. I turned off the hallway lights one by one until only the golden glow from the dining room remained. That's why this gift, my disappearance, isn't revenge. It's education. It's the lesson every parent learns too late, that peace isn't inherited. It's chosen. At the bottom of the stairs, I paused, looking back one last time. The vase shimmered faintly under the morning light, the envelope just visible beneath. I've paid off the mortgage, cleared your debts, and left the proof inside. I'm not giving you money. I'm giving you the quiet you asked for. But remember, quiet and peace are not the same thing. One you receive, the other you earn. You earn. I reached for the front door handle but stopped halfway. The sound of the heater turning off made the house sigh, as if exhaling years of unspoken apologies. Someday you'll walk through these rooms and feel the weight of everything left unsaid. Maybe then you'll understand what I couldn't teach with words. I don't expect forgiveness, only awareness. The wind howled outside, gentle but insistent, urging me forward. If you ever think of me, don't think of the mistakes. Think of the silence that followed them. That was me learning to let you live. Dad, I folded the note once more inside its envelope, sealing it with nothing but the pressure of my hand. Then, without ceremony, I lifted the vase slightly and slid the envelope underneath paper against wood, truth against memory. The lilies trembled slightly, their petals brushing the edge of the glass as if nodding goodbye. I whispered, "Goodbye, Maria. Goodbye, Fern." Then I turned, locked the door behind me, and stepped into the cold. The sound of the lock clicking was soft, but final. Outside, the car waited its engine, humming like a heart that had already decided. I sat inside for a moment, watching the house through the windshield. The golden light from the dining room window shimmered faintly against the snow. Then, as if the world itself were acknowledging the moment, a gust of wind blew strong enough to make the lights inside flicker. And for the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel responsible for keeping them on. The tires crunched over the snow, slow and deliberate, like the sound of paper being folded. The house in the rearview mirror grew smaller, softer, until it disappeared behind the trees. I didn't look back again. The road was quiet, 2 lanes of white, stretching into an overcast horizon. The radio played static, then silence. I let it stay that way. Sometimes noise makes loneliness louder. A gas station appeared after 20 miles, a lonely sign blinking, open 24 hours. Though no one else was there, I pulled in, filled the tank, and watched the numbers climb. The world looked different. Now, even the cold felt honest. Inside the station, the clerk nodded. He was young, maybe 20. Half asleep behind the counter. Heading far, he asked. Far enough, I said. He handed me change, and his eyes lingered on the envelope peeking from my coat pocket, the second copy of Fern's letter. He didn't ask. I didn't offer. Outside, I poured myself a coffee from a thermos. The smell of burnt roast mingled with winter air. I leaned against the car, watching my breath drift away, visible proof that I still existed, at least for now. The phone rang. For a moment, I thought it was the past hauling, but it was her. Fern. I hesitated before answering. The sky above was pale gray, the kind that made time feel suspended. Dad, her voice was small, cracked by something more than the cold. I said nothing. I came by the house, she said. The door was locked. The lights were still on. I watched the horizon, a slow, endless white. There was an envelope. She continued, her voice trembling. Why did you do this? Why didn't you tell me? I closed my eyes. The snow began to fall again softly. I told you everything you needed to know, I said. This isn't what I wanted, she whispered. I didn't mean it like that. I could hear it, the sound of truth breaking, that fragile space where pride and regret finally meet. I know, I said gently, but words have roots, Fern. They grow whether you mean them to or not. There was silence, only breathing on the other end. Then, a faint sob quickly swallowed. Where are you? I looked at the road ahead, a long stretch of white vanishing into mist, far enough for both of us to start over. Dad, please. Just tell me you'll come back. I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. You once said the best gift would be my disappearance. Consider this. A gift wrapped in peace. Her breath caught. That's not peace, Dad. That's punishment. Maybe, I said quietly. But some lessons don't fit inside forgiveness. I let the silence stretch, not as cruelty, but as mercy. She needed to feel it, to understand that not every wound bleeds out loud. I love you, she said finally, voice breaking. I looked up. The first light of morning was spilling through the clouds, thin, gold, fragile. I know, I said. That's why this will hurt. And then before she could speak again, I ended the call. The phone went dark. The world didn't. I stood there for a long time, the wind pressing against my coat, the cup of coffee growing cold in my hand. Then I poured the rest into the snow. The steam rose for a moment, then vanished, like something learning how to disappear. I got back in the car. On the passenger seat lay Maria's journal, open to a page I hadn't seen before. Her handwriting danced across it soft and certain. When love can't be spoken, it must be lived or left. I traced the words with a gloved finger. Then I started the engine. The tires rolled forward, crushing fresh snow. The gas station shrank in the mirror until it was nothing but a faint glow behind me. Ahead, the road curved toward the airport, the sky widening like a curtain being drawn open. Somewhere out there, a new silence waited. Not the kind that hurts, but the kind that heals by erasing the noise. And for the first time, I didn't feel gone. I felt free. The airplane cabin was dim quiet, just the soft hum of engines, and the faint rustle of strangers turning pages they wouldn't remember. Outside the window, clouds stretched endlessly white fields, folding into one another like the sky had forgotten where the world ended. I rested my head against the glass. My reflection stared back, older, lighter, and for the first time in years, not carrying anything that wasn't his to hold. The flight attendant passed by. "Sir, would you like something to drink?" "Water," I said, "just water." She smiled, handed me the cup, and moved on. The simplicity of it, of asking for so little, made me realize how long it had been since I wanted something just for myself. Below us, the clouds broke open for a moment, revealing the ocean vast, silent, a blue so deep it swallowed thought. Maria used to talk about the ocean like it was alive. "It forgives by forgetting," she said once. That's the difference between water and people. I watched the horizon and whispered, "You were right again." Somewhere in the hum of the cabin, I imagined her beside me, not as a ghost, but as a calm presence. She'd probably smile that quiet smile, the one that always made me feel like I hadn't failed completely. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "We'll be landing in Honolulu in approximately 1 hour. Temperature on arrival is 79 degrees. Hawaii. Maria's dream, not mine. But maybe dreams don't die. They just wait for someone stubborn enough to finish them." I reached into my coat pocket and took out Maria's journal. The pages fluttered under the cabin air as if eager to breathe again. Inside on the last page was a note I hadn't noticed before. "If you ever go where I couldn't take silence with you, it's lighter than guilt." I smiled. "You always packed better than me." The man sitting next to me glanced up, probably wondering who I was talking to. I nodded politely, then went back to staring out the window. The sunlight grew warmer, scattering across the cabin in soft gold lines. Faces glowed, strangers lost in their own quiet escapes. A child a few rows ahead was drawing on a napkin. His mother leaned over, whispering something that made him laugh. It was the kind of sound you forget you miss until you hear it again. For a moment, I imagined Fern as that child. Again, the way she used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long drives, trusting that I'd keep the road safe. Somewhere along the years, the road got longer, and she learned to drive herself. That's all I ever wanted, really, for her, to know how to steer without me. The seatbelt light flicked on. The plane began its descent. I closed the journal and looked at my hands, worn, steady veins, like old rivers still running somewhere deep. I thought about all the things those hands had built, a home, a life, and then a silence big enough to fill both. Maybe peace isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you stop resisting. The wheels touched the runway with a soft thud. The passengers clapped quietly the way people sometimes do when they survive something without realizing what it costs. As we taxied toward the gate, I felt the familiar hum of the earth returning beneath me. The flight attendant's voice broke through again. "Welcome to Honolulu." When the doors opened, the air hit me warm, humid, filled with the smell of salt and flowers. It was like stepping into forgiveness. I walked through the terminal, slowly, the crowd moving past me like waves. No one knew who I was. No one expected me to stay. Outside sunlight painted everything in gold: cars, faces, palms, swaying like they'd never heard of sorrow. I took a deep breath. It tasted new. A taxi driver waved. "Where to, sir?" I thought about it, then smiled faintly. "Anywhere near the water." He nodded, loaded my suitcase, and drove off. As the city passed by, beaches, mountains, and children chasing pigeons, I realized something. I hadn't escaped my life. I'd simply outgrown it. The road curved toward the shore, and there it was, the ocean Maria had wanted to see. Wide, endless, alive. I stepped out, shoes sinking into warm sand. The tide came in slow, brushing my feet like an old friend. I closed my eyes and let the wind touch my face. No guilt, no noise. Just breath and the sound of water forgiving everything it could reach. The sun was setting when I reached the beach. The sky burned softly orange, fading into pink, surrendering to blue. Waves rolled in slow, steady breaths, like the world itself was exhaling. I found an empty bench near the edge of the sand, the kind of place people leave flowers or confessions. I sat down, let my shoes fill with sand, and watched the horizon melt. The air was warm, thick with salt. A group of children laughed somewhere behind me, chasing each other through the foam. Their joy didn't hurt. It just reminded me that peace doesn't erase life. It allows it to continue without you. I opened Maria's journal again, turning to the back page, the only one still blank. I took out my pen and began to write. Not for her, not for Fern, for the silence that had followed me here. Day 1 of the quiet life. The sea doesn't ask questions. It just receives. Every wave that touches the shore returns what it can and lets go of what it can't. I think people should learn from that. I paused, watching the tide crawl up to the tips of my shoes. The waves came close enough to taste the salt in the air, but not enough to touch me, like respect between two old souls. A woman walked past, carrying sandals in one hand. She smiled as she passed, a brief kindness between strangers who'd both made peace with something unseen. I went back to writing. Fern will read my letter by now. Maybe she'll hate me for it. Maybe she'll understand. Either way, truth has done its part. It no longer belongs to me. If she ever comes here someday, I hope she finds what I found. Not forgiveness, but perspective. The last line of the sun dipped beneath the water. The horizon glowed for a moment longer, then dissolved into dusk. It felt like the world bowing, not ending. I thought about everything that had led here, every argument, every silence, every debt paid in guilt, all of it collapsing into a single quiet lesson. Some forms of love are meant to outlive presence. I looked at my reflection in the darkening glass of the sea, the gray hair, the lines, the calm. For the first time, I saw not a father or a husband, but a man who had finally become still. I whispered into the wind, "Maria, I kept my promise." I saw the ocean. It forgave us both. The water shimmered under moonlight silver ribbons, weaving across the surface. I dipped my hand into the tide. Let it pull against my skin. It was cool, alive. When I withdrew my hand, I felt lighter, as if the sea had taken what little sorrow remained. I closed the journal and set it beside me. The pages fluttered gently in the wind, not in protest, but in peace. Behind me, the sound of laughter faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of waves. The horizon dimmed until there was only the outline of the world and the sound of everything beginning again. I leaned back on the bench, eyes half closed, and let the night settle over me like a blanket stitched from silence. For the first time, I didn't think about what I'd lost. I thought about what I'd learned. That love doesn't vanish when people do. It simply changes its shape. And in that shape, unseen, unspoken, I finally found home.